Chapter 8, a 52-year period. The works of Fernando de Alva, Ixtlilxochitl, Mexican scholar, circa 1658 to 1648, who was able to read old Mexican texts, preserve the ancient tradition according to which the multiple of 52-year periods played an important role in the recurrence of world catastrophes. He asserts also that only 52 years elapsed between two great catastrophes. As I have already pointed out, the Israelite tradition counts 40 years of wandering in the desert between the time when the Israelites left the desert and started the difficult task of the conquest and the time of the battle at Beth Horon. 12 years may well have passed. The conquest of Canaan took 14 years, and the entire duration of Joshua's leadership amounted to 28 years. Now there exists a remarkable fact. The natives of pre-Columbian Mexico expected a new catastrophe at the end of every period of 52 years, and congregated to await the event. When the night of this ceremony arrived, all the people were seized with fear and waited in anxiety for what might take place. They were afraid that it would be the end of the human race, and the darkness of the night may become permanent. The sun may not rise anymore. They watched for the appearance of the planet Venus, and when, on the feared day, no catastrophe occurred, the people of Maya rejoiced. They brought human sacrifices and offered the hearts of prisoners whose chests they opened with knives of flint. On that night, when the 52-year period ended, a new period of grace had been granted and a new Venus cycle started. The period of 52 years, regarded by the ancient Mexicans as the interval between two world catastrophes, was definitely related by them to the planet Venus, and this period of Venus was observed by both the Mayas and Aztecs. The old Mexican custom of sacrificing to the morning star survived in human sacrifices by the Skiddy Pawnee of Nebraska, in years when the morning star appeared especially bright, or in years when there was a comet in the sky. What had Venus to do with the catastrophes that brought the world to the brink of destruction? Here is a question that will carry us very far indeed. Jubilee. I shall postpone only a little giving the answer to the question just posed. First, I should like to find an explanation for the institution of the Jubilee year of the Israelites. Every 7th year, according to the law, was a sabbatical year, during which the land had to be left fallow, and Jewish slaves set free. The 15th year was a Jubilee year, when the land not only had to be left fallow, but had to be returned to its original proprietors. According to the law, one could not convey his land forever. The deed of the sale was but a lease, for whatever number of years remained until the Jubilee year. The year was proclaimed by the blowing of horns on the Day of Atonement. In the Day of Atonement shall ye make the trumpet sound throughout all your land, and ye shall hallow the 15th year, and proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. It shall be a jubilee unto you, and ye shall return every man unto his possession, and ye shall return every man unto his family. Ever since exegetes have labored over the biblical statement that the Jubilee year was to be observed every 50th year. The 7th sabbatical year is the 49th year, and the space of the 7 Sabbaths of years shall be unto thee 49 years, and ye shall hallow the 50th year. To leave the land fallow for 2 consecutive years was too great a demand, and cannot be explained by the need of the soil under cultivation for rest. The festival of the Jubilee, with the return of the land to its original owners, and the release of slaves bears the character of an atonement, and its proclamation on the Day of Atonement emphasizes this still further. Was there any special reason why fear returned every 50 years? The Jubilee of the Mayas must have had a genesis similar to that of the Jubilee of the Israelites. The difference lies in the human character of the festival of the Jews and its inhuman character among the Mayas. But with both peoples, it was a year of atonement, repeating itself every 50th year in the one case and every 52nd year in the other. Comets do not return at exact periods because of perturbations caused by larger planets. The Mayas expected the return of a catastrophe every 52nd year, because that was the interval between two cataclysms that had taken place. It may be that the comet was actually seen again at such intervals. The Jews fasted and prepared themselves for the day of judgment. On the earliest possible date of its return, the Mayas had their festival when the dreaded time had passed without harm. On the Day of Atonement, the Israelites used to send a scapegoat to Azazel in the desert. It was a ceremony of propitiation of Satan. In Egypt, the goat was an animal dedicated to Seth Typhon. Azazel was a fallen star, or Lucifer. It was also called Azael, Azza, or Uzzah. According to the rabbinical legend, Uzzah was the star angel of Egypt. It was thrown into the Red Sea when the Israelites made their passage. The Arab name for the planet Venus is El Uzzah. Arabs used to bring human sacrifices to El Uzzah. Muhammad, too, in his early days, worshipped it, and even today the Arabs seek its help. On the day in which the Jubilee year was proclaimed, the Israelites dispatched a placating offer of a scapegoat to Lucifer. But what had Venus to do with the Jubilee and the atonement? The birth of Venus. The planet turns and revolves on a quiet circular orbit around a greater body, the Sun. It makes contact with another body, a comet, that travels on a stretched-out ellipse. The planet slips from its axis, runs in disorder off its orbit, wanders rather erratically, and in the end is freed from the embrace of the comet. The body on the long ellipse experiences similar disturbances, drawn off its path. It glides to some new orbit. Its long train of gaseous substances and stones is torn away by the Sun or by the planet, or runs away and revolves as a smaller comet along its own ellipse. A part of the tail is retained by the parent comet on its new orbit. Ancient Mexican records give the order of the occurrences. The Sun was attacked by Quetzalcoatl. After the disappearance of this serpent-shaped heavenly body, the Sun refused to shine, and during 4 days the world was deprived of its light. A great many people died at that time. Thereafter, the snake-like body transformed itself into the great star. The star retained the name of Quetzalcoatl. This great and brilliant star appeared for the first time in the east. Quetzalcoatl is the well-known name of the planet Venus. Thus, we read that the Sun refused to show itself, and during 4 days the world was deprived of light. Then a great star appeared. It was given the name Quetzalcoatl, the sky. To show its anger, caused to perish a great number of people who died of famine and pestilence. The sequence of seasons and the duration of days and the nights became disarranged. It was then that the people of Mexico regulated anew the reckoning of days, nights, and hours, according to the difference in time. It is a remarkable thing, moreover, that time is measured from the moment of its morning star's appearance. Tlaziancalpantecutli, or the morning star, appeared for the first time following the convulsions of the earth overwhelmed by a deluge. It looked like a monstrous serpent. This serpent is adorned with feathers. That is why it is called Quetzalcoatl, Cucamatz, or Kukulkan, just as the world is about to emerge from the chaos of the great catastrophe. It is seen to appear. The feather arrangement of Quetzalcoatl represented flames of fire. Again, the old texts speak of the change that took place at the moment of the great catastrophe of the deluge, in the condition of many constellations, principal among them being precisely Telezan-Cal-Pantocutli, or Star of Venus. The cataclysm accompanied by a prolonged darkness appears to have been that of the days of the Exodus, when a tempest of cinders darkened. The world disturbed in its rotation. Some of the references may allude to the subsequent catastrophe of the time of the conquest by Joshua, when the sun remained for more than a day in the sky of the old world. Since it was the same comet that on both occasions made contact with the Earth, and at each of the contacts the comet changed its own orbit. The relevant question is not on which occasion did the comet change its orbit, but first of all, which comet changed to a planet, or which planet was a comet in historical times. The transformation of the comet into a planet began on contact with the Earth in the middle of the second millennium before the present era, and was carried a step further, one Jubilee period later. After the dramatic events of the time of Exodus, the Earth was shrouded in dense clouds for decades. An observation of stars was not possible. After the second contact, Venus, the new and splendid member of the solar system family, was seen moving along its orbit. It was in the days of Joshua, a time designation meaningful to the reader of the sixth book of the Scriptures, but for the ancients it was the time of Agog. I'm pretty sure that means giants. As I explained above, he was the king by whose name the cataclysm, the deluge of Ogyges, was known, and who, according to the Greek tradition, laid foundations of Thebes in Egypt. In The City of God by Augustine, it is written, from the book of Marcus Varro, entitled Of the Race of the Roman People, I cite word for word the following instance. Their occurrence a remarkable celestial portent, Star Venus, called Vesperagu by Palladius, and the lovely Hesperus by Homer. There occurred so strange a prodigy that it changed its color, size, form, course, which never happened before nor since. Adrastus of Cyzicus and Dion of Naples, famous mathematicians, said that this occurred in the reign of Ogyges. The fathers of the church considered Ogyges a contemporary of Moses. Agag, mentioned in the blessing of Balaam, was the king Ogyges. The upheaval that took place in the days of Joshua and Agag, the deluge that occurred in the days of Ogyges, the metamorphosis of Venus in the days of Ogyges, the star Venus which appeared in the sky of Mexico after a protracted night, and a great catastrophe. All these are related. Augustine went on to make a curious comment on the transformation of Venus. Certainly that phenomenon disturbed the canons of the astronomers, so as to take upon them to affirm this which happened to the morning star, Venus, never happened before nor since. But we read in the divine books that even the sun itself stood still when a holy man, Joshua, the son of Nun, had begged this from God. Augustine had no inkling that Castor, as quoted by Varro, and the book of Jasher, as quoted in the book of Joshua, refer to the same occurrence. Are Hebrew sources silent on the birth of a new star in the days of Joshua? They are not. It is written on whatever it is they write it on in the Samaritan Chronicle that during the invasion of Palestine by the Israelites under Joshua, a new star was born in the east. A star arose out of the east, against which all magic is vain. Chinese chronicles record that a brilliant star appeared in the days of Yahoo. The blazing star. Plato, citing the Egyptian priest, said that the world's conflagration associated with Phaethon was caused by a shifting of bodies in the sky which move around the earth. As we have seen reason to assume that it was the comet Venus that, after two contacts with the earth, eventually became a planet. We shall do well to inquire, did Phaethon turn into the morning star? Phaethon, which means the blazing star, became the morning star. The earliest writer who refers to the transformation of Phaethon into a planet is Hesiod. This transformation is related by Hyginus in his Astronomy, where he tells how Phaethon, that caused the conflagration of the world, was struck by a thunderbolt of Jupiter, and was placed by the sun among the stars, planets. It was the general belief that Phaethon changed into the morning star. On the island of Crete, Atimnios was the name of the unlucky driver of the sun's chariot. He was worshipped as the evening star, which is the same as the morning star. The birth of the morning star, or transformation of a legendary person, Ishtar, Phaethon, Quetzalcoatl, into the morning star, was widespread motif in the folklore of the Oriental and Occidental peoples. The Tahitian tradition of the birth of the morning star is narrated on the Society Island in the Pacific. The Mangian legend says that with the birth of a new star, the earth was battered by countless fragments. The Bharats, Kyrgyz, and Yucats of Siberia, and the Eskimos of North America also tell of the birth of the planet Venus. A blazing star disrupted the visible movement of the sun, caused a world conflagration, and became the morning-evening star. This may be found not only in the legends and traditions, but also in astronomical books of the ancient peoples of both hemispheres. The four-planet system. By asserting that the planet Venus was born in the first half of the second millennium, I assume also that the third millennium only 4 planets could have been seen, and that in astronomical charts of this early period the planet Venus cannot be found. In an ancient Hindu table of planets attributed to the year -3102, Venus alone among the visible planets is absent. The Brahmins of the early period did not know the 5-planet system, and only in later middle period did the Brahmins speak of 5 planets. Babylonian astronomy, too, had a 4-planet system. In ancient prayers, planets Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Mercury are invoked. The planet Venus is missing, and one speaks of 4-planet system of the ancient astronomers of Babylonia. These four-planet systems and the inability of the ancient Hindus and Babylonians to see Venus in the sky, even though it is more conspicuous than the other planets, are puzzling unless Venus was not among the planets. On a later date, planet Venus receives the appellative, the great star that joins the great stars. The great stars are, of course, the four planets, Mercury, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, and Venus joins them as the fifth planet. Apollonius Rhodius refers to a time when not all the orbs were yet in the heavens. One of the planets is a comet. Democritus, circa -460 to circa -370, a contemporary of Plato and one of the great scholars of antiquity, is accused by the moderns of not having understood the planetary character of Venus. Plutarch quotes him as speaking of Venus as if it were not one of the planets. But apparently the author of these treatises on geometry, optics, and astronomy, no longer extant, knew more about Venus than his critics think. From quotations which have survived in other authors, we know that Democritus built a theory of the creation and destruction of worlds which sounds a lot like modern planetesimal theory, without its shortcomings. He wrote, "The worlds are unequally distributed in space. Here there are more, there fewer, some waxing, some are in their prime, some waning, coming into being in one part of the universe, ceasing in another part. The cause of their perishing is collision with one another." He knew that the planets are at unequal distances from us, and that there are more planets than we are able to discover with our eyes. Aristotle quoted the opinion of Democritus, "Stars have been seen when comets dissolve." Among the early Greek scholars, Pythagoras, of the 6th century, is generally credited with having had access to some secret science. His pupils and their pupils, the so-called Pythagoreans, were cautious not to disclose their science to anyone who did not belong to their circle. Aristotle wrote of their interpretation of the nature of comets. Some of the Italians called Pythagoreans say that the comet is one of the planets, but it appears at great intervals of time and only rises a little above the horizon. This is the case with Mercury too. Because it only rises a little above the horizon, it often fails to be seen and consequently appears at great intervals of time. This is a confused presentation of a theory, but it is possible to trace the truth in the Pythagorean teaching, which was not understood by Aristotle. A comet is a planet which returns at long intervals. That's one way of looking at it, isn't it? Never looked at it that way. One of the planets which rises only a little above the horizon was still regarded by the Pythagoreans of the 4th century as a comet. With the knowledge obtained from other sources, it is easy to guess that by one of the planets is meant Venus. Only Mercury and Venus rise a little above the horizon. Aristotle disagreed with the Pythagorean scholars who considered one of the 5 planets to be a comet. These views involve impossibilities. It's funny, Aristotle was like the ancient Einstein, the guy who was wrong, and everybody has to follow. These views involve impossibilities. This is the case, first, with those who say the comet is one of the planets. More comets than one have often appeared simultaneously. As a matter of fact, no planet has been observed besides the 5. All of them are often visible above the horizon together at the same time. Further, comets are often found to appear as well when all planets are visible as when some are not. With these words, Aristotle, who did not learn the secrets of the Pythagoreans directly, tried to refute their teaching by arguing that all 5 planets are in their places when a comet appears, as if the Pythagoreans thought that all comets were one and the same planet leaving its usual path at certain times. But the Pythagoreans did not think that one planet represents all comets. According to Plutarch, they taught that each of the comets has its own orbit and period of revolution. Hence, the Pythagoreans apparently knew that the comet, which is one of the planets, is Venus. The comet Venus. During the centuries when Venus was a comet, it had a tail. The early traditions of peoples of Mexico, written down in pre-Columbian days, relate that Venus smoked, the star that smoked. La estrella que humeva was Citlacoloha, which the Spaniards call Venus. Now I ask, says Alexander Humboldt, what optical illusion could give Venus the appearance of a star throwing out smoke? Sahagan, the 16th century Spanish authority on Mexico, wrote that the Mexicans called a comet a star that smoked. It may thus be concluded that since the Mexicans called Venus a star that smoked, they considered it a comet. It is also said in the Vedas that the star Venus looks like fire with smoke. Apparently the star had a tail, dark in the daytime and luminous at night. In very concrete form, this luminous tail, which Venus had in earlier centuries, is mentioned in the Talmud, in the tractate Shabbat. Fire is hanging down from the planet Venus. This phenomenon was described by the Chaldeans. The planet Venus was said to have a beard. This technical expression, beard, is used in modern astronomy in the description of comets. These parallels in observations made in the valley of the Ganges, on the shores of the Euphrates, and on the coast of the Mexican Gulf prove their objectivity. The question must then be put, not in the form, what was the illusion of the ancient Toltecs and Mayas, but what was the phenomenon and what was its cause? A train large enough to be visible from Earth and giving the impression of smoke and fire hung from the planet Venus. Venus, with its glowing train, was a very brilliant body. It is therefore not strange that the Chaldeans described it as a bright torch of heaven, also as a diamond that illuminates like the sun, and compared its light with the light of the rising sun. You know, it's still luminous, even to this day, when you look at it through a telescope. At present, the light of Venus is less than 1/1,000,000th of the light of the sun, a stupendous prodigy in the sky. The Chaldeans called it. The Hebrews similarly described the planet. The brilliant light of Venus blazes from one end of the cosmos to the other end. The Chinese astronomical text from Su Chao refers to the past when Venus was visible in full daylight and, while moving across the sky, rivaled the sun in brightness. As late as the 7th century, Assur-banipal wrote that Venus, Ishtar, who is clothed with fire and bears aloft a crown of awful splendor. The Egyptians, under Ctesias, described Venus, Sekhmet, a circling star which scatters its flame in fire, a flame of fire in her tempest, possessing a tail and moving on a not yet circular orbit. Venus was more of a comet than a planet, and was called a smoking star, or a comet by the Mexicans. They also called it by the name Tizan Makui, or the Mane. The Arabs called Ishtar Venus by the name Zabaj, or one with hair, as did the Babylonians.
Sometimes there are hairs attached to the planets, wrote Pliny. An old description of Venus must have served as a basis for his assertion. But hair, or coma, is a characteristic of comets. And in fact, comet is derived from the Greek word for hair. The Peruvian name, Chaska, wavy-haired, is still the name for Venus. Though at present the morning star is definitely a planet and has no tail attached to it. But that is not so. NASA discovered stringy things, reaching all the way to the tip of Earth's atmosphere. So it does still tickle Earth and possess a tail. The coma of Venus changed its form with the position of the planet. When the planet Venus approaches the Earth now, it is only partly illuminated, a portion of the disk being in shadow. It's really weird when you look at it through a telescope. It's weird. Being in shadow, it has phases like the moon. At this time, being closer to the Earth, it is most brilliant. When Venus had a coma, the horns of its crescent must have been extended by an illuminated portion of the coma. It thus had two long appendages and looked like a bull's head. Sanchoniathon says that Astarte, Venus, had a bull's head. The planet was even called Ashtaroth Carneum, or Astarte of the Horns, a name given to a city in Canaan in honor of this deity. The golden calf worshipped by Aaron and the people at the foot of Sinai was the image of a star. Rabbinical authorities say that the devotion of Israel to this worship on the bull is in part explained by the circumstance that while passing through the Red Sea, they beheld the celestial throne. And most distinctly of the four creatures about the throne, they saw the ox. The likeness of a calf was placed by Jeroboam in Dan, the great temple of the northern kingdom, Tristria of the Zendavesta, the star that attacks the planets. The bright and glorious Tistria mingles his shape with light moving in the shape of a golden horned bull. The Egyptians similarly pictured the planet and worshipped it in the effigy of a bull. The cult of a bull sprang up also. In Mycenaean Greece, a golden cow head with a star on its brow was found in Mycenae on the Greek mainland. The people of a faraway Samoa, primitive tribes that depend on oral tradition as they have no art of writing, repeat to this day. The planet Venus became wild and horns grew out of her head. Examples and references could be multiplied ad libitum. The astronomical texts of the Babylonians describe the horns of the planet Venus. Sometimes one of the two horns became more prominent. Because astronomical works of antiquity have so much to say about the horns of Venus, modern scholars have asked themselves whether the Babylonians could have seen the phases of Venus, which cannot now be distinguished with the naked eye. Galileo saw them for the first time in modern history when he used his telescope. The long horns of Venus could have been seen without the aid of a telescopic lens. The horns were illuminated portions of the coma of Venus, which stretched out toward the Earth. These horns could also have extended toward the Sun as Venus approached the solar orb. Since comets were repeatedly observed with projections in the direction of the Sun, while the tails of the comets are regularly directed away from the Sun, when Venus approached close to one of the planets, its horns grew longer. This is a phenomenon the astrologers of Babylon observed and described when Venus neared Mars. When the tails of the comets are regularly directed away from the Sun, when Venus approached close to one of the planets, its horns grew longer. This is the phenomenon the astrologers of Babylon observed and described when Venus neared Mars.
That was my favorite chapter so far. That was a good one. I enjoyed that. I hope you enjoyed it too. Thanks for listening. Take care.